Welcome, everyone, to Coffee and an Interview. I'm Jacqueline Pena, and I'm really excited about this conversation we're about to have. I'm here with Janine Lequay. She is the founder of Soleil Edge. We'll learn more about that. And the author of the Do It Change Method, which I'm sure we're all going to appreciate soon. Janine, welcome to the show. And, tell us a little bit about yourself. That'll provide a great framework for the conversation we're about to have.
Absolutely. Well, first, I want to say thank you, Dr. Pena, for having me on. I'm super stoked to be here. So a little bit about myself. As Doctor said, my name is Janine Lequay, and I am what I consider a change strategist. So my career really began in organizational change management over 15 years ago. Actually, into the university setting. I was in project management in student success center. So, yeah. And really, it was an exciting time because I was able to see the view of the transition and changes that students were going through. And then I worked with graduate level students, so seeing them trying to manage their careers while managing, academics and many career shifts. So it was always very interesting to me of the whole world of change and what it was like navigating those spaces and places. So fast forward, I moved to Trinidad and I worked in a company that we did psychometric assessments. And working in that space, now I got to see how assessments came to light and helped people kind of understand better themselves, right? And then how they fit into the career that they were pursuing. And oftentimes we found that it wasn't a good fit. So that kind of was always in the back of my mind. I was like, all right, that's interesting. You're applying for positions and then you take this assessment and then you see, but, the scores don't come out exactly where you thought. And that was kind of eye-opening for me that people were pursuing spaces and places that really didn't fit them, which would obviously in turn mean that they were unhappy in that, right? So that was in the back of my mind as well. But my boss, she was doing all types of change management work all over Trinidad, and she brought me along for the ride. And it was many different HR projects, change management, org restructures, you name it, just hiring campaigns. And I just was able to go along with her and learn from that aspect. And then came to the US, and that's when I started working with Fortune 500 companies in organizational change management specifically. And it's just exciting for me because I realized that change, while we've done a lot of research, we've studied a lot about change from an organizational level, and there are processes and systems of how to manage that, I realized that people don't have a really good understanding of how to manage change. And so that was kind of the impetus for all of this, that my mind was always going. I was like, how in the world, do we as individuals navigate change effectively? And then when I was laid off from my corporate job in 2024, at the end of 2024, I was thrust into the world myself of navigating that specific change. And that's when everything kind of opened up and the framework was developed and the book was written. And it was just a kind of crazy. It's been a crazy adventure since then.
Now, I want to say we're like work soulmates, or I don't know how to explain it, but I'm from the education side as well, and been in a lot of those organizations, worked with many students and faculty. So when you said that, I was like, oh, another education person. And then, of course, transition to the small business side and a lot of work with corporations and things of that sort. So it's very interesting to see that shift. But
Yeah.
change is not about one industry or another. It's not about education versus a corporation versus a nonprofit, for profit, and nonprofit. Changes everywhere. And we have to go through quite a few career changes in our lives many times. And I want to point out that it's a podcast, so our listeners can't see your background right now, but it says your career is not your identity, and I'm tying that to change now. So,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the work you do and change, and the book itself, tell us a little bit about. Let's start with the book. The book itself, it's the Do It Change Methods, and we're talking about change and change management. You're a change strategist. What is the book about? What
Sure.
do we learn from it?
Absolutely. So as I expressed that my background is in organizational change management, and what I found was everything that exists again, was around processes and systems as it relates to an organization that goes through a change. You know,
Mhm.
a CEO wouldn't invest $10 million and have no idea what the change means for the organization, right? And so that's when they call in, you know, change strategists, they call in organizational change managers to say, hey, we're moving forward with this case. We've identified the reality of the current state of the organization. This is where we would like to move toward. This is why we're investing. This is who it's going to impact, et cetera. And that's where we come in and we do the real deep dive now. Okay, so who exactly is it impacting? How are they being impacted? So what needs to happen on various levels of the organization? What communication needs to happen? What training needs to happen? What mental shifts need to happen? And that's the work of organizational change management. So getting people from point A to point B.
Mm.
And so seeing that and understanding, again, that most of the frameworks kind of focus in that as a change practitioner, I realized that there's still the adoption rates were still low. So over 70% of change initiatives in organizations fail. It's like, and that's a McKinsey stat, right? I'm like, all right, so you're doing all this work, you have all these processes and systems in place. Why? How is a change still failing when you have a whole entire framework, right? And then I realized it's because individuals are the ones at the core of the change. And
Mhm.
while we're implementing all these processes and systems, as an individual, they don't know how to move themselves from this is my reality, this is what's happening, you know, an external factor in an organizational change setting. This is what it means for me. This is what I would like to get out of it. And this is how I'm going to choose to move, how I'm going to deal with this change and move through this change. We don't really
Mhm.
do that. We just go along with it. We wing it and we just figure it out. So even though we're unhappy about it, even though we can't understand what the change means for us, we're still very forced to just keep going and push through it. And then eventually you find yourself somewhere on the other side of the change, but completely misaligned from yourself. So as I was looking at all this, I said, you know, really need to find a way for individuals to navigate change. And so I used my experience in education in organizational change management and said, how do I now translate that? You know, I've been doing this work for so long. A lot of people aren't going to do that. How do I translate that in a consumable way for individuals now to navigate internal change?
Mm.
Right. And that's where it was born. And people used to call me all the time, and I'm like, well, just do it, do it, do it. And I was like, what's something people would remember, right? And so I was like, the do it change method sounds great. And from that, I was able to build the acronym, which is discover, own, and those are our planning stages, which some people are great at. And then there's the big jump in the middle into implement, transform, and those are our action phases. And some people are great at that. And so it all came together in a way that I was able, again, to take my learning, my experience from organizational change management, put it into the Do It framework. And that's where the book was born. I told my husband, and I'm like, hey, so I have this like really amazing idea that can help people navigate change. And now I have to write a book. He's like, what? I'm like, I have to write a book about it. He's like, what are you talking about? You've never spoken about writing a book before. I'm like, I know. And I never intended to. But at this point, I have to because now I have to get the framework into, you know, people's hands so that they can utilize this in order to navigate change. And so, yeah, that's where the book was born. And so the entire book outlines, one, it level sets about change. So a lot of myths about change. It debunks a lot of that. It helps people understand that what they're experiencing is normal, which I think we don't have a clear understanding of. Oftentimes in change, we isolate and then we think it's just me. I'm the only one feeling this way. You know, I can't talk about it because I'm embarrassed or, you know, whatever we're feeling, the fear, which is perfectly normal. And we had to talk about that in organizations. There's the curve that shows you that there are valleys peaks and valleys. And it's called the depths of despair, right? That every organization is going to go through it. At some point, there's kind of excitement, but then there is loss of productivity. That's a fact. There's no change that can be implemented without loss of productivity, right? And so as an individual, those steps back that you take, it's perfectly normal, but we beat ourselves up for it, right? So all of
Mhm.
that's in the book, talking about what's normal around change and then actually explaining the framework and giving examples of what it looks like in each phase of the framework. And yeah, so it's all encompassing of the journey of change and how you can navigate it with intention.
You shared so much there, so I'm
I
gonna
did, sorry.
yeah, no, it's wonderful. I'm gonna
You're
pick on
welcome.
a couple of things, and then I want to dive a little bit more into the framework itself. But I
Sure.
want to just highlight that stat you gave, where 70% of change methods or change initiatives fail.
Hmm.
And even if you put $7 million, even if you have a good playbook or SOP around this, or there's communication, and then you said it comes down to people,
Hmm.
humans, people,
Yep.
and that's part of what you're encompassing there. And I thought that was an incredible point, because businesses are not just about strategy
Yeah.
and planning and providing a service and
Hmm.
selling. They're about people. They're
People.
built by people, with people, for people.
Yeah.
And so very interesting for us to always remember that. But then you ended with something else that was interesting, which is
Yeah.
when you are part of a team, right? So all team members have to they should figure out how to manage change, right? Because
Hmm.
they're part of the change.
Yep.
But when you are working on that, you're going to have dip in productivity. Doesn't have to be a big dip, but there's going to be some
Gonna
kind
be.
of dip in productivity, because you're trying something new, you're making some changes, your time
Yep.
isn't 100% on the service or this role. It's also in making that change with the
Sure.
organization, right? You're
Yep.
contributing part of your time to that. And I think that's interesting, because we do beat ourselves up. We think we're not succeeding in this moment of change, but the
Hmm.
moment of change is just changing how we're using our time. We're
Absolutely.
still successful. We're just
Mhm.
not and we're not just successful and productive in the levels and the different things we're doing, because we're taking some of that energy and putting it towards the change.
Absolutely. And I'll even say this, right? Um, that time we're learning something new. So we actually are being successful because we're being productive, right? Because we're learning and we're growing. So it's a different skill set to what we had before, but now you've increased your capacity, right? And your skill set. And so while it feels like we're being unproductive, it's because we're unproductive in the comfort of what we knew,
Hmm.
right? But we're expanding. And so, I mean, that we're growing. That growing can never be a bad thing, right? Unless you're growing at over 7 feet tall, then you might have some issues. But other than that, like growing is always a good thing, right? And so, and you were saying something about teams, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. But in the work, I created a change archetype assessment. So it has 8 different change archetypes, and because people navigate change differently, right? Meaning people internalize differently, they move differently, but we have a one size fits all. Change is happening, you got to push through it, figure it out, you're going to be okay, right? And off, poof, off and go,
Yeah.
right? um, with the archetype assessment, what it does, it really breaks down at a granular level of individuals, how they process the change, right? Whether they're a logical processor, whether they're an emotional processor, right? So we look at
Hmm.
different ways of interpreting and receiving the change, and what pushes that person to move through the change, which is the key, right? The change happened, whether we chose it or not, but how do we move through it? And you'll find in the different archetypes, people move differently. They need different types of information. Some people don't want a lot of information. Some people need a vision. So, for example, I'm an activator. When I'm in a change and you give me too much information, it's information overload. That is a sure way to get me to stall because I can't process all of that. I'm just ready to move. Give me like top 3 high level, I'm ready to go. And that's throughout my life, right? Like literally you'll see it. We're talking about starting business, right? I'm just like, gotta go, gotta go. My husband's an analyzer. So for him, the pace is like, whoa, where are you going? Come back. Slow down. I need to ask all the questions. I need all of the information. I need to know what the consequences are. What are the risks, right? Which is fair, which makes sense. So for him, he wants all of the information. So even relationally, now, when we're going through something, he's like asking me all these questions and he needs to know this and the other. And I'm like, can we just like I thought we already spoke about this. Can we just move? Can we just do something? Like if it doesn't work, we'll figure it out, right? So again, it's just very interesting when you understand that dynamic in teams, right, in an organization, and seeing how people respond differently. And we're thinking, no, like, well, if I'm ready to move, you have to be ready to move too. No, I'm still at the starting block because I need X, and that hasn't been provided to me yet. So again, it's all very interesting, and I don't think that we've done enough work to uncover this space and understand this space. And I'm really hoping that the work that I'm doing starts those conversations.
I love that you share that with us, because you're right. When we're thinking about change, or even a strategic plan, we're
Mhm.
working on a couple of them now at Empowerment Education. That's my consulting firm
Awesome.
that where we do that kind of work. And when
Hmm.
we're doing strategic planning, when we're doing change or organizational transitions,
Hmm.
or strategic growth plans, which is another kind of huge change for a small business to triple, have a goal of
Yeah.
triple its revenue. um Not everyone gets the information the same way or needs it the same way or processes it the same way. And so
Hmm.
another great thing about looking at the book and looking at the archetypes, because I love the two examples, your husband and yourself, to really
Yeah.
show us these differences. How, we'll create one playbook or one scope of SOP, right? Standard
Hmm.
operating procedures, or one strategic plan that's really pretty and has some nice visuals.
Yeah.
We expect everyone to use the information and be part of the change,
Yeah.
and it doesn't work that way. I mean,
It does not
you
work
need
like
the
that.
core info, but it doesn't work that way.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. Like you said, you need the core information. Understood. But I would even say, from a leadership perspective, when you understand the archetypes, you can identify who's going to read that from start to finish 5 times versus who, as they start reading, they're going to be ready to start enacting immediately, right? Or another change archetype, for example, is a harmonizer. So
Mhm.
this person, doesn't matter what the change is, they need to understand what the temperature in the room is. Is everybody okay? How do you feel about it, right? So you're like, all right, the change is happening, we're doing it. How's everybody feeling? Like, are you good? Did you read the SOP? Did you read the SOP? Are you feeling okay? And so even understanding and you need these different types of personalities and these different types of change archetypes, right? People who respond differently to help balance out, right? And so I think it's really important to, like I said, tap into and understand that people are different. And if
Mhm.
we acknowledge that and we're able to understand that, what often doesn't happen is that level of understanding, right? That level of patience amongst your peers, amongst your team, from leaders to colleagues, or to direct reports. Like, it's really having a different level of understanding of how do I engage you to maximize your potential, which obviously in turn will benefit the organization and what we're trying to accomplish, right?
Yeah, very very good point. And part of what I'm also thinking here as you're saying that, and then I
Hmm.
want to get into the framework a little bit, is that teams are made up of different archetypes, to use
Hmm.
the language you're using in your book.
Sure.
But that is important
Of
because we
course.
balance each other out, right? You have the analyzer, you have the activator, you have the harmonizer. I think
Hmm.
we have to remember that these differences in how people work or
Yeah.
process information, these differences are important because when you bring everyone together, it just makes a powerful whole.
Absolutely, 100%. And I can give you a very clear example of that. So my team, as I told you, we have a recent team, right?
Mhm.
But first thing, as soon as you join the organization, you have to take the Change Archetype Assessment so we can understand, because we're moving quickly and changes are happening, right? So we have all archetypes except for the regulator. And the regulator is the one who stabilizes the room. So when everybody else is running, envisioning, harmonizing, the regulator is like, all right, guys, I hear you, but we need to stay like somewhat consistent to what we've been doing, right? Let's ground ourselves before we're ready to jump into the next thing. And it's really funny because, again, in the short time that we've been operating as a team, we've been taking off running and again aborting some of the things, or abandoning, sorry, not aborting, but abandoning some of the things that, again, we need that regulation. And so when we all took the archetype assessment and we looked at it and we looked at our how we match each other and that one gap that we had, and it was like a aha moment, that it was very clear and apparent. Had we never done the archetype assessment, we still would have been running, right? And not realizing that gap that was missing. Now that we realize it, we didn't run to hire somebody. In old fashioned, we would have been like, all right, we need to hire somebody who's a regulator, right? But instead, now each of us understanding that can say, let's slow down a little bit. I see the vision. I see, where we're trying to reach, but let us all regulate a little bit. All right. So, which is just really interesting how that gap was able to be identified. And now we literally make it a point to tap into that space before just running with our natural way of doing things. So,
That's a great point because not every team will have every kind of individual. So,
yeah.
as a team, if you recognize what's missing for the
Hmm.
big team and bringing
Yep.
the puzzle pieces together, then you can fill in those gaps together. Have those
Absolutely.
touch points. Oh,
Yep.
nice.
Yep.
So your framework
Hmm.
and your assessment. Sorry, let me start
Yep.
there. Your assessment is in the book, right? or
So at
no?
the very back of the book, it's
Okay.
listed, right? But it's mychangearchetype.com is the
Okay.
site for that. And so it's not in the book because I wasn't trying to directly align it to the Do It framework.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, it will, right? So once you understand your archetype assessment, then we go through the framework, et cetera, your report. But I really wanted it to be a standalone tool that people could just take, right? And be able to understand, again, their archetype, how they move through change. So what moves them and what stalls them. Yeah, so it is a
Mm-hmm.
standalone tool. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it totally goes in there about, again, stalling. And it, again, is so interesting for me because as I was developing and going through it, I'm like, yeah, because I know, again, I'm ready to move all the time. And I'm going to tell you kind of where this was built from. So after I was laid off, December 2024, from my corporate job, I was ready to run. And I was like, all right, let me go, apply to jobs and do what I normally do. I don't process. I just keep moving, right? So yeah, I'm ready to take off running. Now, it doesn't mean I don't feel or not impacted. I am, but I don't stay in that space very long, right? And so, and a perfect example of this, I unfortunately lost my mom in 2016. At the same time, 2 weeks later, I had my daughter, lost my mom 2 weeks later. And it was an extremely difficult time, but the type of person I am, again, because the change hit, I was like, all right, what do I have to do? Let me focus, let me move. So I never really processed and did the grief, counseling and all that type of stuff because I was just ready to go. I knew that if I stayed in that space, that it would overwhelm me. And therefore, again, I had to move. So similarly, that's what I always do. And I was ready to do that when I was laid off. But I was like, you know what? For the first time, I said, I'm not going to do that. Let me pause for a second, kind of think about what direction I want to head instead of just jumping back into something that isn't aligned with me. Let me kind of figure this out and process this, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was one of the first times that I did that. And I realized, again, I was like, maybe I do process change differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
From, again, my husband, from my sister. And I started asking people, like, well, how do you process change? Like, if this happened to you, like, what would that be like? And so that's where all of this started coming from. It's like, I mean, there has to be something in that, right?
Yeah.
That everybody would experience one change, but then respond differently, receive it differently, act differently. And so again, it was born from all of that happening at one time. And I started deciphering it and started trying to kind of figure it out. And then went into well, how do people process information? And that's where I went into logical, emotional, et cetera, right? And then I broke it down from there and was like, all right, so if we process information this way, then I imagine change similarly. So I started doing all my research and I was like, this just makes perfect sense. And it was really born from that. So it's been an exciting time to say the least.
Wow, but fast moving too, because
It
it
has been fast moving. Yeah.
wasn't that long ago. Wow.
Yeah.
Impressive, impressive. So I just want to go back to the framework and then talk a little bit more around change methods
Mm-hmm.
and change management in general.
Yep.
But the framework was discover, own, implement, and transition. Can you share a little bit about what that framework is, those four components for our listeners, as they're all
Sure.
thinking about not just work change? We'll talk about this as well
Yeah.
because this change happens everywhere in our lives,
Everywhere.
not just in the workplace.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. Just start one thing. Transform is the T, and so we'll walk through each of those, right? So, discover. As I stated earlier, in organizational change management, this is where we identify the current state, right? So, what
Mhm.
is your current state? And in my framework, it's like, all right, kill all the noise of what we would like it to be, what we want it to be, what we expect. What is the reality? This is what has shifted, or this is what needs to shift. And then we look at, well, how do I feel about it? How is this impacting me? How is this impacting the people around me? What does this all mean from an emotional perspective, from a financial perspective, from an X perspective? So we go through all of that and do a true discovery of my reality. And then we also determine our future state. So I always say, we can't get to where we're going, one, if we don't know where we're beginning, but then we also can't get to where we're going if we don't know where that is, right? So we have to figure that out. We need a starting point, we need an end point. And then the change or the transition, sorry, is that which is in the middle. right? So
Mm-hmm.
we have our
Yeah.
starting point, and oftentimes, and that's why I say change is the event. So I talk about this in the book, right? Change is in the process, change is the event. You get laid off, you lose someone you love. I need something different in my life. The actual event is the change. The transition now is the process that we go through to get to that future state, right? So we need to identify what that future state is, because once the change happens, what are we working toward?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And in Discover, we come up with a future state statement that is robust. So a lot of people say, oh, I want to be successful.
What does that mean?
What exactly? Correct. Exactly. What does that mean? I want to be a millionaire. What does that mean? How? Right? Okay, I just want to be a millionaire. So how are you going to get there? So it really forces us to look at what we're saying, aligning with our current reality again, and really identifying what it means to be where we're saying we want to go. And I think once we do that work, I mean, that lays the entire foundation of everything else, right? However, the second step, ownership, or a second phase, I think is the most critical phase, because you can do all the work in discovery. I can understand my current reality. I can understand, yes, the transition is going to be, X, this, that, and the other. But the ownership piece of it is, how am I going to choose, or how am I choosing to engage with this change?
Yeah.
That's the mindset shift. That's the big one, right? I can choose to do nothing. I can choose to be disgruntled. I can choose to look at it as an opportunity. I can choose, right? So it's really getting people to understand you have options. That's what the ownership is about. Yes, this change, especially in the most dire situations, a medical situation, yes, this change has happened to you. Understand that nobody is taking away from how impactful that is. At the end of the day, you still have a choice in how you're going to move forward, right? And so that's what ownership is about, is really having that empathy and understanding to yourself and saying, yes, I feel all these things, but I still have ownership in how I move forward. And that's what makes the difference, right? So that's the ownership phase. And those two, again, are the planning stages. And some people function really well in that space. Then we go into the implement. So yeah, I understand my reality. I know where I want to go. And yeah, I'm going to do it. I just don't know how. I have no idea, right? And then it feels overwhelming because we have this vision, and I talk about this in the book. Like, I swear the movies has messed us all up, because we have this view that, like, when you decide I'm going to pursue this, the skies open up and it comes down exactly, and it's like the rain, and you're like, oh, this is the moment exactly, right? And so when we have that vision, that becomes overwhelming, because you're like, oh wait, no. If I say I'm going to relocate, now that means tomorrow I have to find a place. I have to move. I have to inform, like, no, it doesn't have to happen at that speed, that pace, and that huge big bang way. It's little consistent steps. And so that's what implement is about. What little steps can I take to get to that future state? And through doing comes clarity. And I talk
Mm-hmm.
about in the book, right? We have this thing that we have to figure out, like, we have to figure it all out before we move. When you start moving, you start to see, right? That's when the fog starts to clear. You start to realize, like, ooh, that wasn't the best thing to do. Wrong step. I need to go here instead, right? Like, you really start to see that this is not necessarily the path, or this is the path, or, again, I'm taking these small steps. I'm learning from it. I'm growing from it. And you start to see that consistency, right? What
Yeah.
happens in that space, and again, in the book, when we start taking steps, we're going to start questioning ourselves when it doesn't go the way that we planned, right? And that's when a lot of people abort mission. They're like, shouldn't have done this, run in the opposite direction. Let me just stick where I was comfortable because this felt scarier, right? But we talk about that's normal. Again, that's all part of the change curve that we were talking about. You're going to have days when you were like, oh my gosh, I'm so amped. I'm ready to hit it hard, and I'm ready to dot, dot, dot. And then you're going to have days where you question all of life's decisions, right? Like, what in the world was I thinking? What am I doing? And again, all of that comes with the territory. So taking those little consistent steps, right? Planning them out and working toward that future state is, again, what builds momentum, again, builds the clarity, etc. And then the transformation phase is really about identifying those wins along the way and being able to understand and see how far you've come, right?
Yeah.
And that often happens in quiet times. And again, I said the movies messes us up with that. And in the book, I talk about driving a stick shift. So I talk about the story that I bought a car, couldn't drive the stick shift, but I really wanted a stick shift. Oh yeah. And so I traded in my really nice Acura that I had at the time. It was an Acura 3.2 TL. And I was sitting at home and Ford had an ad. And I was like, oh, whatever financing. And I was like, oh, let me just go in and see. So I ended up buying a Ford Fusion. So from my Acura TL, I buy a Ford Fusion, right? But because it was a stick shift. And when I went in, I was like, I'll just see what they say. My payments ended up being like $5 more. So either $3 or $5. I can't even remember more a month. And I was like, oh, perfect. Awesome. I'm going to buy it. But they had to bring it in. I can't remember where they're shipping it from. So the day they called me, it was a Sunday, and they're like, hey, your car is here. So I call my friend, Stephanie is her name. I'm like, hey, Stephanie, what are you doing? She's like, nothing, why? And I was like, so I bought a car. She's like, oh, okay, cool. And I was like, I can't drive it off the lot. She's like, I'm sorry, you what now? I was like, yeah, it's a manual and I can't drive it off the lot. So can you meet me at the dealership and teach me how to drive it? She's like, are you like crazy? I was like, yeah, a little bit. And she's like, oh my gosh. She was like, I love you, but I question you all the time. I will be there in a few minutes. I was like, all right, cool. So she comes, we do a crash course, and this is Sunday. Mind you, at this time I'm living in Northern Virginia, right outside of DC. So I have to drive in rush hour traffic Monday morning, yeah, to get to work. And so I do it. And I'm telling you, every day I get to work, I am literally shaking. So I have to sit in the car and, calm myself down before I go in because I'm just like, of course, questioning life's decisions, understandably so, right? And I was just like, I know I really wanted a stick shift, but this was not the best idea. I'm like going into work, like I said, shaking. Fortunately, no accidents, nothing happened. Everybody was good. I would put on my hazards when I had to go like on a hill. I was like, please don't honk at me, and it was funny because it's like a new car. So like people be like, your hazards are on. I'm like, I know, I can't drive it. It's like, what in the world are you doing? It was quite an interesting decision that I made. But long story short, about 2 months afterwards, now I'm like testing myself on hills, right? And I'm like golden at this point. And I am loving it. And I remember receiving a comment at time, it was like, you're driving a stick shift? Because so my boyfriend was always in front and the friend who was visiting was always in the back. So didn't even realize I was driving a stick shift because I was so smooth at changing the gears, right? So he was like, oh, it's a stick shift. And I was like, yeah, it is. It is a stick shift, right? But it was only in like that moment that I'm like, I drive a stick shift, right?
Mm.
And so it wasn't, again, anything loud, amazing, big bam, boom. It was after the fact, in a moment that I was just like, yeah. And then, I thought back to the beginning. And even now, I can see how much I changed and transformed over that time. And now, transformation, this has become part of my life. This is my day to day. I drive a stick shift, and now I know how to drive a stick shift, any other time. And so that's where I'm saying the transformation really comes usually in hindsight, that and in a moment of still nothing crazy, and you're just like, wow, I did this thing, I did it. So that is the framework.
That was amazing. I think for me, I listened to this framework just now. I took notes. I hope
Hmm.
our listeners are taking notes,
Yeah.
mental notes, written notes, because it is a very accessible framework.
Hmm.
It's I get it. And I so there's some things that popped out about the framework. The fact is that we're creating the future statement. I thought that was amazing, right? Because you
Hmm.
need to work towards something. So
Yep.
that future statement gives you that. That piece about ownership was very critical.
Hmm.
The implement, I thought that was fascinating because a lot of times we have our future statement, we're owning the work we need to do, but we stay stuck
Yeah.
in the planning phase. Some of us are perfectionists, some of us don't
Yep.
feel ready, some of us have imposter syndrome, depending
Hmm.
on what it is that you're doing. But a lot of times we stay there and we do a lot more research. Let me do more research. Let me
Yeah.
plan. Let me think through this. And sometimes you just have to go. It doesn't have to be a huge leap because
Hmm.
and you should have a plan,
Yeah, of
but
course.
the
Yeah.
plan will help you because you're not going to be able to stick to it, right?
Yeah.
So there's going to be a curve, an exit
Exactly.
that's closed, and you got to keep driving a little longer on the highway. The plan isn't
Yeah.
going to go as you thought, but a plan will help you start, and then
Hmm.
as things come up, because you have a plan, you just have to shift the plan a little bit. So I
Absolutely.
love that piece.
Yeah.
or a lot sometimes, but that's
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
very
it's true.
important point. Yeah. And you know, you make a decision, you say, oh wait, I gotta go back to here. It's like a board game right now. I'm picturing a
Yeah.
board game.
Well, you know what? I love what you just
Yeah.
said. We have to go back to here, which
Yeah.
is what the framework does. I have to go back to discover, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the framework, and people think that change is linear. It's not. And
Mm.
so the framework, sometimes you have to go back, right? When that shift happens, sometimes you have to go back into ownership, like shift it again. All right, how am I going to tackle it this time? How am I
Yeah.
going to see it through? And so it's a constant just going back, right? And revisiting. So the framework can be utilized over and over and over again. You're going back into the phases, but if you understand what needs to be done in each phase, then you're like, all right, I can go back there, bam,
Yeah.
bam, bam, do it, and
Let me
then
revise. Mm-hmm.
revise and move
Revise
forward.
the
Yep.
statement, go back to ownership. So
Yep.
yeah. And
Yep.
then yeah, that's an excellent point. And then transition happens in the quiet moments when we reflect, when we
Mm-hmm.
and through that reflection, we realize, oh,
Yeah.
this happened.
Yep.
I'm not this.
Yeah.
So this very tangible. Thank you for sharing your framework. Now let's talk
Sure.
about change.
Yeah.
Because this is not just about career change.
It
This is
is
a
not.
framework we could use in life change, whether it's a health
Yes.
issue, whether it's a move, a change in a
Mm-hmm.
relationship. I'm thinking marriages, divorces.
Mm-hmm.
Change is something that we know is going to happen,
It's gonna
right?
happen.
Right, I can't promise you win the lotto, the lottery in your state, but I can tell you that there will be change in your life, right?
Yeah, exactly. That I can promise you. Yeah.
The
For
change
sure.
is coming at
All
some
right,
point.
change is coming some way, somehow. It is coming. Yeah.
So for us, in all walks of life, for
Hmm.
all different things, what advice do you have about change, or what are some kinds of change that
Hmm.
you've seen, experienced, worked with? And I know you talked about career change, but just other
Yeah,
changes, and that this model would work for.
absolutely. Literally any change under the sun, and I'll give some examples. But one thing I want to say first, I think change is really about breaking the autopilot loop,
Mm.
right? We're constantly just on autopilot. Once something becomes ingrained in us, right? So it's like, okay, I know how to do this. This is my career, autopilot. This is what I know how to do. I'm in this relationship. How many times have we heard about relationships going on autopilot, right? And not necessarily romantic relationships, even friendships. This is what we do. This is just what we know because we find that level of comfort in it, right? So it just becomes second nature, right? The autopilot. What happens is when a change comes, it shifts that entire reality. And it's like, whoa, what I knew, what I felt comfortable with, this is now all new to me. And our body and our mind is constructed to be able to identify familiarity. Once we go into new territory, even if it's a good change, and I want you to think about that. Think about again a career or a relocation that you want, right? Like, oh, I've always wanted to move to this place, or I always wanted this dream job. When it happens, you're still nervous. You start questioning yourself. Did I make the right decision? And that's something that you wanted. It's a change that you sought. Why? Because our neuroscience, our biology tells us that it's different. We don't know it. Stay away. Same way when a body enters our body, or when we work out. When we think about that, right? What about when you're working out and you're building muscle? It hurts, it burns, right? But we know it's good for us, but it burns. And then we're like, oh my gosh, it's so heavy, right? But then we actually start craving the burn, right? So again, our body, this is how our body is supposed to react. So we're doing exactly what we're supposed to be doing, which is saying, danger, question, nope, don't want to do it. Stay in comfort, right? So change, like I said, it's happening. It is everywhere. Every single change, whether you call for it or you don't call for it, is going to shift your reality. And that's where the question becomes, how do I deal with that? What does this mean for me, right? And it automatically puts us into the framework. So
Mhm.
there's no one change that I can't think of that it doesn't apply to, right? I have, as far as clients, I remember talking to someone after she took the archetype assessment. She's divorced. And she said, you know what? I wonder if we'd taken this when we were still married, would we have had a chance? And it was so profound to me because what she was saying was a lot of change was happening and they just couldn't see eye to eye, right? And so they got divorced because it was way too much. Having a child, losing people, relocating, job shifts. So all of this was happening at one time, and they were both dealing with it differently, right? So she knows her archetype. She's a strategist, which means for
Mhm.
her, she's plotting things out and pulling it together. She doesn't know what his archetype is, right? But she was thinking he was more so like a processor. So for him, he is trying to internalize it. So while she's ready to, she's making plans, he's internalizing and trying to process. So they're not seeing eye to eye when all of these changes and shifts are happening. And
Yeah.
so her thing was like, could it have been different? If we had that level of understanding with each other, what could things have looked like, right? And so that's where, in relationships, and then I have people contact me all the time, like, oh man, with the relationally, we took it, and now I understand my husband's this, I'm that. Oh, it makes so much sense, and everyone's like, oh, my husband needs to take this. As soon as they take it, they're like, my husband needs to take this because I need to understand. So it could be applied in anything, again, because it is a framework that just grounds us when the ground shifts beneath us, right? So when realities are shifting, this is a way for us to understand internally what it means for us. And I think alignment is key. The world is moving so fast. You and I, we come from the educational world, right? I mean, you
Mhm.
far more than me, right? But back then, I
Yeah.
was in the educational space, and how many students are pursuing degrees and then they're not even working in that industry, right? Or they change their majors so many times because they think that's what they want, but it's not really what they want. It's not what they expected, right? That's happening all the time, which is really about alignment,
Mhm.
right? And that's okay. We're trying things, we're trying to figure stuff out, we're trying to get aligned, but are we asking the questions? Are we challenging ourselves to really look inside before we start looking at everybody else's expectations of us? Oh, you need to be a doctor, you need to be a lawyer, you need to be an engineer, you need to be a this, you need to be a that, right? Granted, your skill sets are in something else, and that's what you enjoy, but you don't want to do it because everybody expects something else of you, right? So it's that internal alignment that I think we need to get back to when things shift. How do we get back there? And I think that's where this framework really applies because it helps us get realigned to ourselves, understand ourselves in the as it relates to this change and this shifting reality, and helps us again determine the steps of how we move through it because we can't stay here. We know we
Mhm.
can't stay here, right? When a shift happens, we have to move because that's life. And so
Yep.
I think it really pulls in all of those aspects. And like I said, I can't think of a change. There's not one that I haven't seen, that I haven't experienced that it wouldn't apply to, you know? And even if, so some people, again, you said earlier, some people are great planners and
Mhm.
some people are great activators, right? So even if you're great in one area, the entire framework really gives you an opportunity to look at all aspects from your lens. And so, if anything you would take away is being able to look at those other phases that aren't natural to you to understand what the change means. Yeah.
I mean, very powerful stuff for all our listeners. I mean, like I said, we can guarantee it. It is
Mm-hmm.
guaranteed. We're all going to go through some change at some point.
Yep.
Change is inevitable in our lives, not just in our careers, in our lives. I'm going to say
Yeah.
that again. So having a change method
Mm-hmm.
gives us tools to know how to navigate change, to understand how we're navigating it and what we could do,
Mm-hmm.
the archetype perspective, and then having the framework with the four pieces
Yes.
is very, very helpful. So, a
Sure.
question for you as we
Yeah.
wrap up the interview is,
Mm-hmm.
we've learned so much from your experience. We learned about your framework. We understand
Yeah.
a little bit more about archetypes, and thank you for the free resource. Oh, I'm sorry,
Mm-hmm.
not free, for the
Yeah.
resource.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Correction.
You're right. It's not free. No, I'm kidding. Yeah.
For the resource that the link will be placed in the description so you can go down
Yes.
and see that
Absolutely.
if you decide to go for that.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely you can learn about your archetypes. So much information in this session and so much
Mm-hmm.
more that you can decide to go for, whether through the book or through the test and
Yeah.
all the resources we put in the link. Question for you is,
Mm-hmm.
what, we've had this great conversation. What are some final thoughts or words of advice,
Yeah.
um, for us? Because now my brain is going 100 miles an hour. I'm thinking
Yeah.
about all the changes and then the changes I'm going through, the
Yeah.
changes we've been through, and then in the business. Uh,
Yes.
final thoughts, words of
Mhm.
advice, or share something we haven't had a chance to talk about that you feel
Mhm.
is very important for us to have as we think about change.
Absolutely. So one of the things to think about as you experience change, oftentimes we isolate and
Hmm.
change. And what I'm really trying to do again is change that aspect and get people to get into groups and community. So from two aspects. One, every Thursday from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m., I have what I call the change experience. Literally, you sign up, you come in, we talk about it. That simple. What are you experiencing? What are you going through? Listening to other people's perspectives. We loosely look at the framework, just getting our minds kind of wrapped around it, right? But it's a space where, because all of the events I've done in every group environment I've been in every corporate room that I've been in, anytime there's vulnerability and somebody says, "This is what I'm experiencing," somebody's like, "Me too." Right? There's always a connection point, right? You're not alone. People have all the changes. Now, I'm not minimizing what people have been through, right, or are going through, but somebody's been there, done that before, right? And probably plenty of people have been there and done that before. And so while we think it's just us, there's so many people, and maybe it may not be in the exact same way, but somebody, again, is feeling what you're feeling, experiencing what you're feeling in some way, shape, or form, and talking about it in an environment that is judgment free, that we just put it out on the table, I think really helps people just let it out. Right. So this is from, like I said, Thursdays from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Going to be adding a 7 to 8 p.m. option as well. Haven't decided the day for if people want to come in after work. Again, just to provide a space for people to get it out, right? In a judgment-free way and just say, hey, this is what I'm going through. It sucks. It's great. It's wonderful. I don't like it, whatever the case may be. So other people can be like, yeah, I went through that too, right? So there's that. And then last thing is, so my entire business is built around the framework, but I run group intensives. And so I partner with whether it's organizations, corporations, individual group intensives, so that we can have this environment and we go through the framework in, again, group environment. Studies have shown that people are more effective in groups. Studies have shown that there's accountability and that things actually stick when you're in a group. And so that's why I do the group intensives. And so there's small groups. You sign up. Again, you could do it individually through the website, or companies can partner with me for me to run the intensive for whether it's your clients or for your organization members, your organizational members, so that we help people become aligned with the changes that they're experiencing, and we help them move, right? So whether it's deciding to have medical treatment or to not have medical treatment, we're helping them identify what space and place is aligned with them. Or if the organizational shift, what that means for the individuals. And I think this is, again, the very big piece that has been missing. And all of the change management we have been doing is this internal alignment, and the group intensives allow us to do that, utilizing the Do It Change method.
Oh, well, that was very, very helpful. I want to
Sure.
just share that the dates and times share are Eastern Standard Time.
That's correct.
So we're talking in South Florida,
Mm-hmm.
but again, you'll have access to how to contact Janine and the links to these resources if you decide to go for them as well in
Mm-hmm.
the description of the podcast. Yeah. But
Yeah.
very, very, very helpful,
Awesome.
very I've been using this term a lot lately, therapy session, but for me it really was because you're thinking through all the changes you've been through and how
Mm-hmm.
those could have been handled differently,
Yeah.
but thinking that there's always change and
Mm-hmm.
feeling more empowered because there's some tools and great advice and a framework that can be used for change in my personal life and
Yeah.
professionally and for my organization.
Absolutely. 100%. And thank you. And yes, that's exactly the feedback that I love to hear, right? Is thinking about it totally from a different lens. I don't just have to wing it. There is
Yeah.
a framework that can help me to navigate this space, right? That we know isn't going to be easy, but I have a way now to navigate it with intention. And that's really what the book is about. How do I navigate change with confidence, intention, and momentum?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much for being on the show. Again, to our
Absolutely.
listeners, resources. The links are in the description. Thank you for listening to Coffee and an Interview with Janine. We have this amazing framework. I hope you all listen to this, got some great nuggets of advice, some great gems, and that you feel more confident handling change at all seasons of your life.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Pena. Really appreciate it.